Oh, and we're live. Hello, everyone on YouTube. What's up? Um, we're here today to talk about Svelte. Surprise. So this is the start of a series of kind of Svelte dev vlogs, kind of. I don't know what exactly we want to call them yet, but I'm here with Rich. Hello.
Hey,
And yeah, we're basically going to go through what has been changing in Kit and maybe Svelte and language tools at some point in the future. We'll see. Uh, but yeah, so I thought we could start with just like looking at the monthly blog that Danny makes or writes, I guess you'd say.
God bless Danny. Like we
Yeah,
we've been doing a lot of shit lately, like making a lot of new stuff, and they do such an incredible job of summarizing all of these change sets, which like if you're not glued to the change logs on GitHub, then this really is your best way to keep track of changes. So thank you, Danny. It is
yeah,
really appreciated.
super consistent as well. So they've been doing it for quite a while now, right? Like
Yeah.
feels like a year or something. But yeah, all right. So, Rich, what's new in SvelteKit? We have app paths here. What's this?
Yeah, all right. Let's just like go down the list in order.
Mhm.
So app paths can now be used within an app, making things like component testing with VTest, using Storybook, etc. easier. This is all thanks to Ben McCann, who uh, is really good about making sure that SvelteKit works with ecosystem tools. I don't personally use Storybook, and I like use VTest now and then, but I don't use them in anger a lot, and so I'm sometimes a little blind to the ways in which these other tools have expectations of how they're interacting with other things in the project. And app paths is this SvelteKit-ism. We make this virtual module available to your applications, so that you can use it to construct things like image source equals base slash whatever, and things
Right.
will work. But because those are virtual modules that are injected by the SvelteKit Vite plugin, when you're building your SvelteKit app or when you're developing your SvelteKit app, um, you need to have that plugin inject them for it to mean anything to other stuff. Um, and the way that those modules work, like it only works in the context of a SvelteKit app. So as soon as you are using your components inside Storybook or you're testing your components in VTest, they import these modules. The module needs to contain something meaningful, absent the context of a SvelteKit app. And so Ben figured out a way to make that work. And that just makes your code more unit testable, more storybookable. Um,
Storybookable. Yeah.
yeah, which
So
is just a nice quality of life improvement.
I wonder if we could see some kind of example here. Probably not. We'll see if we can figure out an example that I can post later. Because the thing I remember about doing VTest or Storybook and stuff is that it's not that hard. It's really
I
yeah.
thought I was going to sneeze. It's going to sneak up behind me and take me by surprise in a minute.
Yep. Oh. Yeah. So what I remember when using Storybook, maybe not Storybook. I think I might have used some other similar thing. I remember it being quite easy, but maybe I didn't use it an advanced way that needed. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
I mean
really use
the
these a
Storybook
lot.
team have been great at like getting the integration to work. I think it's pretty seamless these days.
Yep. Cool. So good for anyone that wants to use Storybook or VTest for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Adapters. Well, you can now configure them per route. So you do that in the, I assume in the server.ts file, kind of, or
Yeah.
how does that?
So background. At the moment, your application, or at the moment, prior to this change in 1.5 or whenever it was landed, your app was kind of an all or nothing thing. You could pre-render certain pages, but beyond that, if you had some requirements for dynamic server rendering, then you would either have the entire application handled by, say, serverless functions or handled by edge functions. You couldn't mix and match them. And that's not ideal, because you might have some pages or some routes that are best handled at the edge of the network, whereas other pages have a dependency on data. And so like that rendering should really happen right next to where your data is.
Yep.
And this is something that Next.js has figured out, right? Because on Vercel, if you configure like one part of your application to run at the edge and one part of your application to run as a serverless function, like Next will just split those things up and generate the functions accordingly. And we didn't have something similar in SvelteKit. Obviously, we wanted to do this feature in a non-Vercel specific way. We want any platform to be able to take advantage of this feature. So what we have now is something called root config. If you export a config option from a plus server.js file, a plus page.server.js file, or a plus layout server.js file, then those configurations options will get merged. And when your application gets handed off to your adapter, you can the adapter can read that configuration and like generate infrastructure accordingly.
That makes sense.
So far, Vercel is the only adapter that can take advantage of this, but it's like any other adapter could. So Netlify, for example, is an example of a platform that has both serverless and edge functions, and so could use something like this. But conceivably, this feature could be used for other things as well. One example, again, Vercel, is incremental static regeneration, which is this idea that even though your page is dynamic, it depends on dynamic data. You only need to like recompute the contents of that page when that data actually changes. So for example, you might have a content management system. When you edit an article in the CMS, it like triggers a webhook that causes a specific page to be regenerated. So you don't need to A, dynamically server render every page on every visit, or B, pre-render potentially thousands of pages of content. Incremental static regeneration is sort of a best of both worlds thing. And because root configuration allows you to put basically whatever you want there, you can just take advantage of the capabilities of the platform that you're deploying to. We can just add incremental static regeneration to SvelteKit on Vercel using that without adding like any platform specific elements to the framework itself. So that's pretty cool. I can actually give a little demo of the different. Let me see if I can find the URL.
Yeah, but while you're pulling that up, I can talk a bit about like what I've been doing on the Svelte Summit website, because this is we deployed to Vercel, but I haven't used the incremental static regeneration is what it's called, right?
Yeah.
So I've been kind of stuck in this place where I kind of want to preload the data, but I still want to have the form actions. So what I've been doing is I've been like preloading a separate API route for my data, but then I keep the actual page where I displayed the data is still a dynamic, because I want the form actions, right? So
yeah,
while we're on that, so I could just as well use incremental static regeneration there, right? That's a perfect use case for it, because it just fetches the data once dynamic.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So while we're on that topic, I was thinking a lot about like, it would be pretty nice to be able to easily preload some data that you would just inject at build time while you keep some other stuff dynamic. So for example, on the Svelte Summit website, we have like a list of sponsors that I fetch from an API, and like that doesn't change. It's always going to be the same until I until I rebuild it in my case. But So are there plans to have like a, I guess that would be the equivalent of get static props in Next.js. Is that something you guys have been thinking about?
Uh, does that already work? So what you basically want to do is you want to pre-render your data, but not your page.
Exactly.
And you can do that in a way that for client-side navigation, it would fetch your pre-rendered data from the API. Would it work for server-side rendering? I actually don't know off the top of my head. We'd have to look into that. But that is a very sensible use case. That is something that if it doesn't already work, then we should make that work.
Yeah. So I could actually show you what I've been doing if you want. Let's see. This is kind of a tangent, I guess, but let's see here. Share screen. How do I do this? Share screen window.
The YouTube comments are telling us that you're too quiet, Kevin.
Oh,
you need to.
Oh, is that better? Is it louder?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's creepy. All right, let's see. So I should probably bring this up here. All right, so I'm gonna close stuff down. All right, so I have this load function here, basically. So this is the page that I don't want to pre-render because I have the. Oh, there's a lot of stuff. Sorry about this. Mm-hmm. So we have this subscribe function, right, for the newsletter on the page, and because I want the newsletter subscription function to work, I can't pre-render the page, right? So what I've been doing is I've been just fetching the data from a separate route. So for example, the API/questions, it's just like a server API route that I've just been pre-rendering. So I think that just renders out like a JSON file that the load function then fetches kind of locally. So I mean it already works, but what I would want to be able to do is something like this: export const preload, blah blah blah, and then that would be the static part of the load function, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, ideally this would work without you changing any code at all. Like you're fetching /API/questions, and because like we know that that's been pre-rendered already, like, we know to just grab the pre-rendered content, or if pie in the sky, if this is a long-running process, if this is a serverless function that gets hit multiple times or whatever, then like getting it again is a no-op because it's already cached. Like, so that is the kind of thing that I think would be beneficial for performance without you having to do anything, which is like our sort of North Star. Let me show you the little demo of the multi-root stuff, the multi-config stuff rather.
All right. Yep.
Select window or screen. Oh my God, how does any of this stuff work?
So in the middle at the bottom there, you should. Yep.
There we go.
I can see your whole screen, and this is going to be.
Okay, so this is a little.
So I can only see your Firefox window here. Sorry.
Oh, God. Really?
I'll just hide it for now until.
Why do they make this stuff so difficult? Share screen.
It's not easy when it's hard. That's a weird saying we have in Swedish. It doesn't translate very well.
Okay, I think I can just show the.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah,
I can see.
Okay, there we go.
I can see Firefox. And your IP, which is I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to get hacked now. The world knows my IP address.
All right. Yep. Okay.
So this is an application that is rendered on the edge, and so if I refresh the page, you can see just down here in this tiny little gray text that the site was regenerated on demand for you. If I click over to the node page, then we're not obviously not going and fetching this HTML from a Node program, but we are calling a Node serverless function to get the updated data. So this regenerated thing that is being generated in a serverless function in Node.
So I think we're just seeing the Vercel window right now. Do you have multiple windows? I think you need to share the whole screen rather
what
than
the hell?
So you're just sharing a window right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. This is deeply fucking weird. I am sharing Chrome.
Yeah. Okay. You're sharing Chrome now. Yeah. But just Chrome, not any other stuff.
God, I hate computers.
Especially new ones, right?
It's because I had. So you know what happened? It's because I had the same. The same app, the same page open in Chrome and Firefox, but Chrome isn't letting me share. Jesus Christ!
You probably need to update some like.
The browser can't access your screen.
Yeah.
This is why you should never go on a YouTube stream having literally just got a new laptop.
Luckily, it's not a very, very high stakes one, so there's that. I think you might need to restart Chrome to like allow it to share or something in the Mac thing.
Oh yeah, here we go.
And then you're gonna have to restart the.
I would have to quit Firefox, which would mean that I would leave this stream.
Yeah, well, you could just join it again. It's fine.
Okay, see you in a second.
Yep. All right, so this is the solo Svelte blog stream. It's not really solo. I'm just waiting for Rich to get back. Do we have any quick questions about Svelte Society or Svelte Summit or Svelte Tech or anything? Oh, no time for questions. Rich is back. Hello.
Hey. All right, let me try this once more.
Yeah, so Malaleche is actually asking, what are we trying to do? We're trying to show what's new in Svelte or SvelteKit. So it's a monthly stream that we're gonna do, where we go through the new stuff. And I'm getting a private message from Dominic asking if I'm moving, probably because of this. I am not. I am renovating. As you can see, the wall is like broken. Broken. That's not the right word.
Okay, can you see this now?
I can see one window.
Okay. Finally. Google Chrome isn't your default browser. No, I don't want it to be my default browser. Firefox till I die.
Safari.
Okay, so this page that we're looking at, this was rendered in an Edge function on demand, probably like just up the road from here. And so you can see down here, it's being generated live. Every time we refresh the page, we're getting a new server rendered page. If I click over to the Node version, then it's getting the data. So obviously we're not getting a new page because we're using client-side navigation, but the data that is powering this page, which includes my IP address again, even though it hasn't changed, and this new update time, that is coming from a serverless function. And if I refresh the page, then the entire page is coming from a serverless function. And then again, if I click onto the Edge page, then it is going to get the data from an Edge function. So here we are mixing and matching server-side rendering, client-side rendering, serverless functions, Edge functions. We could throw in some pre-rendered stuff in here as well, or some incrementally static regenerated stuff here as well. And it all just works. Like, so you can tailor how your pages are rendered and how your data is rendered to the very specific needs of different parts of your application. So you don't need to say at the outset, I want to use Edge rendering for my entire application, and then suddenly realize that has, paradoxically, it has these negative impacts on performance because suddenly you need to do like 2 round trips to a data center to get some data, and you're trying to render it in Singapore. Instead, you can have the best configuration for every different part of your application. So that, I think, is pretty cool. And I very much hope that we can get support, or not support, but the other adapters like Netlify, but also other ones can take advantage of this feature.
Yeah,
it's neat.
So some adapters can't do it, obviously, right? Like the Cloudflare one probably, like they only run on the edge, right? So that would be hard.
Right.
Or the Node one that only runs in one's, obviously, in one location. But yeah, it's a cool feature.
Yeah. All right. So after that torturous diversion while I set up my computer, should we move on to the
the snapshot, the snapshot
next
mechanism.
Snapshots. All right. Oh God. Now I've got to try and work out how to share my screen instead of just a window.
Yep. I can share the newsletter in the meantime. So we're going to be talking about the new snapshot mechanism. So yeah, exciting. It's a pretty cool feature as well.
Yeah. So why don't I create a little demo app, do some live coding. That never goes wrong, right?
No, never.
So first of all, check out this sweet new onboarding that we've got. This is using a so Nate from Astro, Nate Moore, he released a library a short while ago called Clack Prompt, which is like anyone who's built CLIs in Node has probably used the prompt library. This is just a nicer and leaner version of that. So I'm going to use the current directory. And we're going to create a skeleton project. Use TypeScript with JS doc. I'm going to add prettier. And then just install my dependencies. Just looks nicer than the old one.
Yeah, it almost looks like a regular GUI kind of thing.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah,
like if you could click with the mouse, then you'd be golden.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we need to have like a GUI for creating SvelteKit apps.
I don't know. It's not that many options, right? Not yet. Anyway. Sorry, continue.
Okay, so here's my brand new app. Just bring that over to one side.
I'm gonna remove the Svelte Society logo here so people can see.
And I'll create 2 pages, A and B. And then I'll add a layout so that we can navigate between them.
Could you move that? You're sharing your entire screen, tiny window. There
somewhere. I can move that. That's nice.
Perfect.
Okay. So on the first page, let's add an input. Doesn't actually need to contain anything. If I type something into this, and then I go to B, and then I go back to A, then the input that I had put in previously is lost.
Oh no! What do we do about it?
Oh no! My precious text.
Yeah.
And that's actually not how browsers work by default. If this were a traditional multi-page app and you were to go to page B and then you were to hit the back button, then it would actually recreate the form state, because browsers use something called the BF cache. So they basically snapshot like everything about the page, and then when you navigate back, it just like rehydrates that snapshot instead of actually reloading the page. Right. Which is cool. It makes back forward navigation very snappy. You don't have a lot of control over it, which can be a little problematic at times. So what we would like is the ability to emulate that behavior, but have it in our control and make it work with client-side navigation. So we have this new feature called snapshots. And the way that it works is we export a snapshot object with two methods, capture and restore. So if I now create a variable to capture some stuff, and we can use the DOM element like this, or we could, if we wanted, we could do bind value instead. I'm going to use the DOM element because like it shows a little bit more of the flexibility, I think.
Yep.
And then we'll do let text, right? Text equals input value. And then when we restore it, let's give that the name there. Actually, we don't need to capture it here, do we? Sorry, I've forgotten how to use this. We just return the input value, and it's complaining because we haven't declared a type. So I'm just going to HTML input element. There we go. Input value equals text. Okay, I think this is going to work. Although it's complaining that it doesn't know what the type of text is. So I'm going to add some types for that as well. Snapshot of a string. Okay, nice. So now it knows that text is a string. Okay, so now in theory, if I've set this up correctly, if I type some text in here and then I click over to B and then I click back, it will actually just restore the input. So that's obviously awesome. Useful for form inputs, like if you're
multi-step forms.
You see this in like Discord and stuff like that. If you're typing a chat message and then you click over to something else, then you come back, you want the message that you were typing to still be there. Same for just like any kind of forms. It's also useful for restoring scroll position, stuff like that. Or perhaps if you I don't know, if you had a file tree viewer and you wanted to capture which parts of the file tree are expanded and which are collapsed. Anything like that is essentially ephemeral DOM state that you don't have represented in your application in some deeper way. It's just component state, essentially. Snapshots are useful for that. What's neat about this is it uses session storage. So if I reload the page, if I reload the page, then it will recover what I had previously. So even if I navigate to a different page entirely, like a different site, and then I come back, it will have saved my progress, which is kind of neat. There is a proposal at the moment in GitHub issues that rather than tying this to the history entry, you would tie it to the URL, or rather you would have the ability to define your own key. And what that would mean is that if I click over to B now, and then I use the link to click over to A, if I have defined a key that says we want to base this off the URL path name instead of the history index, then it would recover the content in this case as well as when I just use the back navigation. So that's something that we might add in future. There's a GitHub issue if people want to weigh in and talk about what they would use that for. But that's pretty cool. I don't think other frameworks have a feature like this. You have to really wire it up yourself, which is a pain.
The closest thing I can think of is it's not entirely the same thing at all, but like Vue has this if else thing that just hides the component rather than actually removes it. So it uses like display none. So the state is still in the thing when you like bring it back. Kind of does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah. This is like less about components and more about like the raw data.
Exactly. All right, so that's the snapshot mechanism. Pretty cool. Then we have the options method is available now. I mean, that's a quick one. It's the options method. What does it actually mean? Like, what can you do with this?
I'm not sure what a use case for this is, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Same.
But it's a verb. It's an HTTP verb, along with get, post, patch, put, delete, whatever. you can now specify an options handler, so you can customize the response to an options request. Which I think the time that you would need to use this is if you are making things available to other domains. Like you're not just building API routes for yourself, you're building things that like other sites could use your app as an API. I think in that context, like sometimes like the browser will issue what are called pre-flight requests, where it will send an options request to know what kind of request would be accepted by the other origin.
Right. Yeah.
And we tried to like figure out if there's a way that we can just automate this, but we decided that we can't. So instead,
it's just easier to add
like, if you have a reason that you need to implement an options handler, you can now do that, whereas before you couldn't.
Cool. So before we move on, there's a question here. So it's about the snapshot thing. I'll bring it up on the screen here. So could this not be abstracted to say something like use :snapshot on your inputs?
It could not. So the limitation is that we need to be able to reliably associate state with a component that survives a navigation. In other words, it survives the element or the component's own destruction. So if, like, when we navigate from A to B in this example, right, this whole component is getting destroyed. And so you could have an action that captures the value as the element is being destroyed. But then when the element is recreated, how do you know that you're restoring this bit of state that's meant for this element and not this other bit of state which is meant for that element? Like if you had two of those actions on the page somewhere, like how do you reliably associate the state with the new element? Because it's not the same. There is no guarantee of identity between those two things. The only way that we can guarantee identity is by exporting the snapshot object from a layout or a page component, because SvelteKit knows that if you navigate back from B to A and it's regenerating this page.svelte component for A, then it knows that that is the same component as was previously used for that page. Whereas everything else, it's just not possible, like on a deep level to do that. Like you could, it feels like it should work in trivial cases, but it's the last thing that we want is to have something that works in trivial cases, but then fails in very confusing ways if you do something that we didn't quite anticipate. So we've restricted it to page and layout components for that reason.
Yeah. So this is not only for forms and inputs, right? This could be for anything that you wanted to restore when you go back or forth as well. So
as long as you can serialize it to session storage,
right?
Which basically means JSON. Like it needs to be
gotcha.
JSON. So here we're capturing this input value. We could not return the input itself because you cannot serialize an HTML element, but you can serialize the string.
All right. Cool. So richer error messages have been added for invalid exports. What is this?
Yeah, so something that it's quite easy to do if you have, say you have a page.js and you have a load function and you return some data from here, you might decide that you want to add an action as well. Const actions equals like that. And if we load this page, then we're getting an internal error, which basically means look at the console. And if we look at the console, hopefully it's going to tell us invalid export actions. Let me make that bigger so that people can see it.
Oh, nice.
Invalid export actions. Actions is a valid export in +page.server.js. And that makes sense, right? Because you can have a load function in a page.js, in which case it will run on the server and in the browser. Or you can have a load function in a page.server.js, in which case it will always run on the server. And that's useful because you have direct access to your database or to cookies or to this, that, and the other. But if you have actions, they can only ever run on the server. You can't have a form action that runs in a page.js file. So before it would just sort of say, you can't do that. But now it's telling you how to fix it. If we rename this to page.server.js, then reload the page because it got a little bit confused by that, then everything obviously continues to work. Just a nice little quality of life thing. Also, if we do export const foo equals whatever, we're now getting the error message in the terminal instead of in the browser DevTools, because this is now running on the server, obviously. And it's actually telling us that this time foo is not a valid export. These are the exports that would have been valid. Just little things to make it easier to debug stuff in your application. There's never too many error messages.
Yeah, it's sometimes it can be confusing. Like I've been in situations where I've had an error and I've had to read 4 or 5 lines down to find where the actual error is. It's a bit confusing sometimes, but yeah, it's a good improvement. Streaming promises. This feels like a big one.
This is the good stuff.
Yeah, and we're already at 1.8. We started this vlog at 1.4 over here, so now we're at 1.8.
I said, man, we've been busy.
Yeah,
we're doing a lot. So we've been trying to think about the right way to do streaming for a long time. So the context here is, ever since HTTP 1.1, it has been possible to stream data when you request a page or when you request a file. The server doesn't need to send it all in one go, which is useful if you don't have everything ready at the beginning, or if you have some parts of your page that are going to load slowly. And so we've been thinking about how could we incorporate streaming into SvelteKit, because people talk about this a lot. Can your framework stream?
Is this what the framework creators are just talking about behind the scenes?
Oh yeah, people love streaming, and I will confess that for a long time it didn't really make much sense to me, because when you have when your framework streams by default, and by that I mean it emits the beginning of your HTML page, including some head content, and then it sort of progressively renders the rest of your page. A lot of stuff just doesn't work. For example, the page title, which belongs in the head, along with any other meta content page description, all of that stuff, realistically, that is probably going to come from the leaf, not from something higher up.
Right.
Because you're loading a blog post, and that contains some data which you're going to use for SEO. And if you try and emit data before you've reached that, then what are you're just going to inject that content later? But then what happens if it fails to load? What if it's a 404 or even worse, a 500, and you've already responded with a 200 with some partial content? Then you can't sort of backtrack and replace what you've already rendered with an error page. So it doesn't really make sense. And also this idea of progressively streaming your page from top to bottom, which some frameworks have been doing for a while, it kind of results in a slightly nasty user experience.
Things shift around and move, and
things shift around, and also if I'm on a page, I want the stuff that the leaf is responsible for. Typically, I'm not on your product page to look at the other categories of product.
Yeah.
I want to look at this thing, right? So it doesn't make sense to me that you would just show me irrelevant stuff. We'll get to it later. We'll get to it later. In the meantime, just reshuffling everything on the page. So that's what's called in-order streaming, and I've always felt that it's this theoretical performance benefit, but in practice it makes things worse, and you have to think about all of these scenarios in which you fail to get the data. What we want instead is some kind of out of order streaming, or just a way to show a space, a loading spinner or some skeleton content, and then we try and fetch the data once the application hydrates. So those were the two options that we looked at.
So is that what's been added now?
Well, we began with the skeleton UI idea. Next.js has this, as of version 13, Next.js has this idea of a loading UI. Next to your page.js, you can specify a loading.js, which returns some UI for, so you navigate immediately, and it shows
like placeholder stuff.
Placeholder stuff, and then gradually, once the data arrives, it will get replaced by the page.js. And we actually implemented a version of that idea at first, called plusloading.svelte. And it turned out just not to really work because there's too much ambiguity. Like, it's very unclear, should you render that when you're server rendering, or should you wait for for the data to resolve if you're server rendering the initial page? If you have this at a higher level in the tree, like, do you remove the current page so that you can show the loading UI higher up the tree, or do you, like, there's so many questions that there's no canonical answer for. And so we reluctantly decided that was not the right approach. But then a while back, I saw a tweet from the Quick guys. Quick is this other framework, and they said, we're working on a way to serialize promises.
Oh.
And I'm like, wait, what? How the hell do you serialize a promise?
You can do that?
Like, yeah, and anyone who's worked with promises, like, you know that you cannot access the value of a promise without calling .then. Like, how can you possibly send some HTML and then contain like a promise value within that? And so we started thinking, like, how are they doing this? The answer is actually quite obvious when you think about it. When you serialize a promise, all you're doing is you're streaming the markup, and then once the promise resolves, you add an extra chunk to the stream that resolves the promise that you created when the markup was initially sent. And so that is what SvelteKit now does. It's kind of similar to Remix's deferred mechanism, but we don't have all of the extraneous API. You don't need to import a special helper, and you can put promises anywhere in your tree. So essentially what we've done is, instead of adding like a streaming mode or anything like that, we now just support promises as first-class values, just like anything else. So SvelteKit server load functions, you can return JSON, you can return regexes, you can return dates, you can return bigints, maps, sets, cyclical objects, repeated references to things, like all of this stuff.
Anything but functions.
Anything but functions, basically. And like custom classes. We don't currently support like sending your own classes over the wire, because like how do you serialize that?
Yeah.
Something that we might look into in future, but like right now, not a thing. But in addition to all of those types, we now allow you to send promises as well. And if I share my screen again, I can show you how this actually works. So we're just going to look at this demo once more. If I now click on the streamed versions of these, then it's streaming delayed data from the server. I don't know if you can see that down there.
Yep. Around like where the IP is.
Yeah.
It says streamed. Yep.
And the way that this is working, if we look at the source, then we've got our like standard SvelteKit boilerplate, but at the bottom we have this additional script tag which has been injected.
The font size?
That's a very good idea.
Thank you.
We have this additional script tag which is calling this SvelteKit resolve function with the data. And so earlier, when we created the initial data of the page, we added this defer function. This creates a promise with the ID of 1. And then when this script runs, it resolves the promise with the ID of 1 with this data.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. If we were to then navigate client side, it's obviously not getting HTML from the server, it's getting data. And
Right.
it's doing that by getting a / data or _ data JSON file, which there we can see that. You see
Yep.
that first
Yep.
we get the initial serialized data, and then later the resolution pops in. So we have these two different mechanisms based on whether you're server rendering or client-side navigating, but it amounts to the same thing. You can now stream your data, and so it's out of order, which is ideal. You have complete control over how you use this, whether you use it for skeleton UI or whatever, and you don't need to do anything special. You can just return promises from your load functions on the server, with one caveat: they cannot be at the top level, and the reason for that is that let me do a little demo here. If I do sleep equals value ms new promise set timeout. Okay, I'm just creating a little helper function here so that we can see this in action. If I do a sleep 1 for 1,000, and then b sleep 2 for 2,000. Inside here, I'm gonna add a data export. Okay, so data has, you know what, I'm gonna give this some type annotation so that we get proper type completion.
Yep.
Param is of type T, that is of type number, and it returns a promise of T, and then we'll just add that like that. Okay, so now now it knows that A and B are going to be numbers. So if we do A data.A and B data.B, get rid of all the input stuff. We don't care about that anymore.
Yep.
And then if we try and load this page,
It's going to take a while.
It takes 2 seconds to load. And the reason for that is that inside our load function, when you return a promise at the top level, SvelteKit will actually await that. And the reason for that is because if we just made this made this an async function, if we required you to await your promises inside your load function, then whenever you have 2 of them, it's super easy to accidentally create a waterfall. So if we have an await here, imagine that this is fetching some data from a database or something, right? What we've just done is we've said, go away and get A, and then go and get B. And that's a waterfall. That's really annoying. So instead, we made this design decision
3 seconds
a while back that these will actually happen at the same time. Because of that,
makes sense.
Because of that, we had to add this rule that if you want to stream a promise, it has to go in some non-top level property. So like we can call it promises or whatever.
That's kind of interesting. I always wondered why this was the case, but here's the answer.
Yeah. So let's I'm gonna, just for the sake of making the demo a little bit nicer, we'll resolve that after 1 second, and then we'll do sleep 4 after 2 seconds, and then now we'll do C await data dot promises dot C.
So we have a question here in the comments. What happens if JavaScript is disabled? So I assume it won't load the data, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we haven't got onto caveats yet, but that is absolutely true. If you have, okay, so
Yay, it works.
You can see that working. And this will also work if we navigate to B and then back to A. Yes, this does require JavaScript. If you don't have JavaScript, then you will always have the skeleton UI. And so what we've said in the documentation, I think, is that this is for non-critical data. If it's something that should influence the status code of the page, like you get a 404 if something isn't found, or something else, then it's critical data and you shouldn't stream it. But for an example, you might have a blog post, the content of which is considered essential, but the comments of which are kind of a nice to have. And so if it's going to take a long time to get the data for the comments, then maybe it's worthwhile for you to render the page immediately and then get the comments once the page is loaded. But that is a decision that we leave to application developers.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a big warning box on the documentation side telling you that.
Yeah.
Telling you basically this. Yeah, so that's a pretty.
Someone said, "Rich, can you use dark theme? My eyes are bleeding." Look.
Are you gonna go on a rant?
Not a rant exactly. I don't even know how to do dark theme because I just never do this shit. I personally like light theme because it's how I stay awake. Like I just like to have the screen just like blasting blue light into my eyeballs.
Basically blinding you.
Yeah.
I actually tried out using light theme for like a month, just a couple of weeks ago. A couple of months ago, and then I stopped doing it a couple of weeks ago because it just looks so much nicer with dark mode. I kind of like light mode because it's easier to read in like a very lit up environment, I think. Like if you're out in the sun or whatever, you can, it's much easier to read. Anyway, tangent.
Are there any other YouTube comments that we?
Poggers, beautiful magic, very cool. I think that's a very, very nice response about this feature. It is a very cool feature. Like it's a very good feature, right? It's very useful.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that we kind of waited for the ideas to kind of settle down a little bit. Like we could have done streaming for 1.0, but it wouldn't have been the right version. Sometimes you just sort of have to let things kind of stew before the right design approach presents itself.
Or even just like implement like a very simple variant of an idea. Just makes you figure out stuff that you didn't realize before, right?
Exactly.
All right. So, and after the streaming promises, we also have this preloadStrategy thing.
So I'm gonna. I think to demonstrate this, I'm gonna need to start building this application instead of
all right,
showing the dev server. PnPm preview. And then we'll go over to localhost 4173. And then we'll look at the source of this. And you can see some relative paths in here. We have a relative path to favicon and a relative path to this the entry points for the application.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that we use relative paths is so that if you're just generating some static HTML, that HTML is portable. You can run it anywhere. And to give you a slightly better demonstration, if we were to have like XYZ page.svelte like this, and then rebuild, and then go to XYZ, you can see that we now have this ...
Right.
So this is what we mean by relative URLs. Everything is relative to the current page. And so we've been doing this for a while, but it turns out that it wasn't actually sufficient because there are some situations in which we were not using the correct relative paths. If, for example, I were to have a photo in here, we'll just use the favicon again. on here, image source equals, and then we'll pull in the assets path from at paths, oops, typo, and then prefix the favicon like so. Alt equals Svelte logo like that. This I think, if I've understood correctly, this is going to break because the asset path is just the empty string.
Right.
Or rather, it doesn't break. It's actually doing that correctly.
Is that because the favicon is just in the root of the assets folder, maybe? Like
it
if
is.
Would be.
I'm trying to work out how to demonstrate the way in which this was previously broken.
Yeah. So we're
okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this was the issue here was if we were to then take this HTML and put it on a base path, which is something that could happen if you're deploying to IPFS. IPFS is this like distributed
interplanetary file system.
Interplanetary file system. You don't know the base path that you're deploying to until you've actually built your application, because the base path is a hash of the application contents, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so there's like a circular dependency. And so if you had something like this / favicon in your markup, then that would fail. This one works because it's a relative URL, but this one down here, this is going to fail if you're deploying at a base path that you didn't know at build time, which is a niche scenario, but it is one that people do in fact encounter.
Right.
But now if we edit our Svelte config to add paths relative, relative true, and then rebuild it, it's now using relative paths based on the current page that you're rendering. And the way that it's doing this is it's actually overwriting the value of the assets export. So this value here, this is being changed dynamically based on the page that is currently being
interesting.
rendered. Yeah, so it will do that. It will render the page, and then it will reset it to what it should have been in case anything else needs to use it. And in that way, we're able to get relative paths everywhere. What we also added, though, is the ability to do relative false. And so if you're explicitly specifying that value as opposed to just leaving it undefined, then not only is that path relative absolute, but all of the other paths that were previously relative are also absolute. This is useful if you're using if you have like a base element, which some people need to do for various reasons. Like that will break if you have relative paths. But now it'll work because you can just set relative to false. So this is like a super niche option that most people will not need to ever mess with. But if you're doing something that involves a base element, or if you're doing something that involves deploying to IPFS, or like making a Chrome extension or something like that, where relative paths are important, then that's an option for you.
So we have a couple of comments in the chat here. Why is this not default?
Relative true. Why is relative true not default?
Yeah, I assume that's what they're asking. Yeah.
Yes. It's not default because that would be a breaking change. Technically, it's possible that that you're expecting the value of the base and the assets import from app/paths to be what you configured in your Svelte config. And in fact, our own tests had some places where we were using that for string manipulation. Like if the path slice assets.length to get some value, like things like that, pretty unlikely that you'd be using that in reality, but it would be a breaking change. And we really don't want to have breaking changes unnecessarily. The current setup works for most people. And so we're just going to leave it as it is. We will probably in version 2 set it to default to relative true. And then at that point, you can have relative true, or you can set it to relative false, but there wouldn't be a relative undefined. But for now, just to avoid annoying breaking changes, we're keeping relative undefined as that secret
That makes
third
sense.
option.
Yep. Yeah, so we have one last thing to talk about, I think, and it's the, let's see, it's a new configuration option. Right, so it's the...
Right, yes, we skipped over that one.
Yeah, but there's time, so...
There is, okay.
This seems like a pretty nice thing from just reading the description. What's it about?
So to demonstrate this, I'm going to need to pre-render this page. Because otherwise the preload stuff only exists in the HTTP headers, which is no good. Export const pre-render equals true. And then I'll preview that. Hold up. Oh, it's because I'm not on the pre-rendered page.
Oh, yep.
Okay, so now that we're looking at a page that has been pre-rendered, and because it's pre-rendered, because we're serving a static asset, we don't have the ability to influence the headers that go along with the response. And so we've injected them as link elements in the head here. And that's convenient for having this discussion because it means that people watching the stream can actually see them. Yep. Link rel equals module preload is a way that you can tell browsers, we're going to need this module immediately. I want you to go and fetch it, but don't evaluate it yet. And that's important because you need to preserve the evaluation order in order for, you know, module B to only run once some essential setup work has been done by module A.
Right.
And it's also useful to prevent waterfalls. If you just import module A and that imports module B and that imports module C and that imports module D, then you have this thing called a waterfall where the browser doesn't know that it needs to get D until it's got C, until it's got B, until it's got A. And so you can see in your network tab, you have this sort of steppy waterfall looking thing. Module preload allows us to avoid that because we know, because we've just built your application and we understand the dependency graph of your application, we know that for any given page, you're going to need certain modules, and we can present that graph in a flattened form that you can see there. And we tell the browser, get all of these simultaneously. Don't wait for the import to tell you that you need to go and get this, because I'm telling you now that we're going to need to get this. All right, super useful feature, and it makes application startup significantly faster. Yeah. Unfortunately, module preload only works in Chrome.
Oh no.
And yeah, so there is a polyfill for module preload, but we found that it doesn't actually work because browsers change their behavior. And so we've been looking into alternative approaches.
I have a vague memory of Routify doing this actually at some point, and I think Jake was doing something with iframes, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Sounds like some dark magic.
That could also have been like another feature that I'm misremembering. But yeah, there used to be like a rollup plugin that you could use for this as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so for extracting the module graph is one thing, but for actually telling the browser to load the modules, that's another.
Right.
Because in fact, let me show you what this looks like in the network tab. If we go over here and then we reload the page, then you can see that all of these things in the waterfall column, right, they're all loading at the same time. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this because obviously we're on a local network. Like we're not going to see the effect of the waterfall in other browsers. I don't know. Maybe we can if I just open that in Firefox. Oops.
Does Firefox have a throttle thing? It should have, right? If you turn on 2G or something.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, let's try this.
This is a feature I need to use on the Svelte Summit sites, because I'm getting warnings about waterfall. Too many requests. Maybe it's not the same thing, but
I'm just going to get rid of all of the streaming stuff because it's confusing the demo. Fuck's sake. Firefox actually isn't working at all for me right now. It's just hanging. The request is hanging. I have no idea what's happening.
It's the live demo gods that are not smiling upon us today. But yeah, so basically it
you can actually see it here. Okay, so
yeah, there you go.
If I make this column a little bigger, you can see that whereas in Chrome everything is sort of setting off at the same time, more or less. Like we're not waiting for one module to load before the next module loads. Over on Firefox, we're loading the entry points, and then we start loading these other modules, and then we start loading these other modules here. That is the waterfall that we're trying to avoid.
And that can get out of hand pretty quickly, right? Like 9 milliseconds, and you have like 50 files. That's
yeah, and this is off a local. This is off a local server as well. Like realistically, you're probably looking at 100 milliseconds latency for a deployed application. And so if you have a dependency graph depth of 3 or 4, which is not unrealistic, then multiply that by the latency, and that's the minimum time before your application can start up. And so
that's a long time.
Why Chrome with module preload is so much faster. And so we want this to work in other browsers as well.
So oh, sorry, continue.
Well, the way that we eventually settled on is we have this thing called a preloadStrategy. Oh fuck, where is the option? It's inside output. Okay.
Yeah.
PreloadStrategy can be one of module preload, which is the default, preload.js or preload.mjs. Preload.js means that instead of using link rel equals module preload, we instead use link rel equals preload as equals script.
Right.
And this is something that browsers do understand. I think Firefox still messes this up because I think it is now going to request modules twice. Okay, yeah, it does. So you can see this. We're requesting start.js here, and then we're requesting it again further down because we're telling it preload this and also import it. And Firefox gets terribly confused, doesn't know what to do with that. Safari, on the other hand, I think if we go to the same
the GOAT browser,
here,
yes.
Well, see if you still feel that way after. How do I? How do I add
so you have to go into preferences first and enable developer tools settings, I guess. Yeah, and then advanced, then show develop. Yeah. What I have no idea why. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then I think it's Command Option I to open the dev tools. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no. That doesn't look good.
So I think that has actually worked. So these are the modules that would have been waterfalled, and instead of being waterfalled, they are all coming in at basically the same time, I think. Is that how that's working?
I don't know.
It's a little hard to tell.
Yeah.
But that's because Safari doesn't cause duplicate requests. If you preload a script and then you later import it as a module, it would be like, I know that this was previously told to me to be a script and now it's a module, but whatever, it's the same thing. And so that kind of works. But we have lost some performance in Chrome by doing this because Chrome will preload it as a script and it will parse it as a script, but then you import it and it's like, well, hang on, this is a module. This isn't a script. And I've got to parse it again now.
So it's doing
Safari
kind
does
of
the
what
same, but-
Firefox does. Like does
no,
it twice?
it's not requesting the module twice, but it is.
Oh, I
parsing
see.
the
I
module
see.
twice,
Gotcha.
which has this very, very tiny performance impact.
Could you
So
do
that-
it? Could you do it dynamically for like checking the browser agent or the user agent and doing it? For
Not
Chrome
really,
or
no, because these links that are injected into the HTML here, like the time when you need this is when you're pre-rendering stuff. when you
I
don't
see.
have access
Right.
to
Yeah.
the user agent.
That makes sense.
Okay, but the final variant, if we change this to preload MJS and then rebuild that, then we're going to have the exact same thing that we have here, except that these files have an MJS file extension instead of a JS file extension. And this means that, so Safari works the same as before. I don't know why that diagram suddenly looks so completely different, but you can see that like I think I know what it is. It's because everything was cached. Okay, if I clear the cache and then I reload. So you can see that it's not like these requests aren't waterfalled on this stuff. So that is working correctly. But Chrome now is doing the same thing as before. It is preloading the modules eagerly. But because of the MGS suffix, Chrome is like, oh, this isn't a script. This is actually a module. And it will parse it as a module. So later when it gets imported, it doesn't need to parse it again. It's already ready.
Nice.
It's in the module cache. It's ready to go, which is the best possible performance outcome. So you get the module preload behavior on Chrome, but you get the preload behavior on Safari. On Firefox, you get double request because like Firefox just whatever. But it doesn't matter because no one uses Firefox.
That's a sad state of affairs.
Apart from me and a handful of other people. And so, but this is a good thing to set if you are concerned about performance for iOS users.
Right, because it's only Safari,
like typically you will have a lot of people using Safari because it's the only browser currently supported on iPhones. And so opting out of the default module preload and into preload MJS or preload JS will give you better performance on Safari. The best option to use is preload MJS. This is what I would recommend people set if you want the maximum performance. The reason that it is not the default is because the MJS extension isn't supported by all web servers. So what we found, we initially did this as the default, and what we found was some people who are using like old versions of Nginx and like that hasn't been configured to recognize the MJS file extension, like the apps were breaking, and that's obviously no good. So we changed the default back to module preload, which is the standard way. But if you want to maximize performance, then I recommend setting a preload strategy to preload MJS if you can, preload JS if you cannot use the MJS file extension. The good news is Safari has now implemented module preload. It hasn't shipped yet, but it has been implemented. And I believe Firefox may have also implemented module preload.
I could check on can I use, right? Should be.
Yeah, I don't think it'll show up in can I use yet because like it's on nightly branches. If it's in Firefox at all, it's on a nightly branch.
It just says nope. Yep.
Yeah. But it will be coming to stable versions of those browsers in the hopefully relatively near future. And this is the great thing about complaining on Twitter. Like it's actually significantly more effective than just filing bugs. It turns out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Safari has been like they've been really like improving. They've been improving a lot lately. Like especially the next version that has like notifications. Oh yeah, of course they're being forced, but
they're being forced because pretty soon you will have the option to not use Safari on iPhones, and so like they're
the horror.
Yeah, they're panicking and trying to make Safari an actually competitive browser, which like great.
I mean they're adding notification stuff and like proper PWA things as well. So like finally we can just use the web stuff instead of these hacky native things.
bit by bit. Yeah.
Yep.
And so, soon enough, the preloadStrategy option will no longer be necessary. But for now, if you want to maximize performance, set preloadStrategy, preload MJS.
I'm going to instantly after the stream, I'm going to go update the Svelte Summit website with this. I think that's it for all of the new stuff. Do you want to spend a couple of minutes talking about like what's coming? What are you guys working on at the moment?
Okay, I might have a little bit of an announcement. And if Simon's watching this, then he's probably worrying that I'm about to announce something that we are not yet ready to announce. I'm not. That will come soon. This is a pre-announcement of an announcement that there is going to be an announcement sometime this week, which I am personally very excited about. But that's not that. I want to share some news about Svelte 4. We obviously have been kind of not neglecting Svelte Core, but it hasn't been our prime area of focus for the last while because we've been focusing on SvelteKit so much. And we are now at a point where we want to rectify that. We want to like shift the balance a little bit and focus on Svelte Core. And what that looks like is we are planning to have a maintenance release of Svelte, which will be a breaking change. It will be Svelte 4, new major, which is not going to add a whole lot of new features. It's basically just going to like clear out some technical debt in the repo. And that will allow us to start working on a new version of Svelte, which does have new features. So right now we are trying to get everything in order for a major release, but as I say, a maintenance release, in order to do a much bigger release later this year.
Well, exciting.
So if you see a bunch of activity on the Svelte repo, that's why. It's because we are trying to get our house in order.
So what are some things that you're fixing with this Svelte 4 release? Like I saw dropping Node 8, kind of.
Yes.
That's an old version.
Dropping old Node, yeah. So no one is using Node 8 anymore, but you can't drop support for Node 8 without it being a breaking change. So that is a sort of thing that we've had to wait until Svelte 4 in order to do. And by dropping all those old Node versions, we can do some nice things like drop CommonJS. Instead of... So at the moment, if you install Svelte, then you're downloading a CommonJS version of every Svelte module plus an ESM version of every Svelte module. And we're also giving you source maps for everything because everything gets bundled up and processed in various ways because we build the library using TypeScript. And all of that stuff means that your package on disk is like ginormous because you've got all of this junk that you don't need. The reality is that every currently supported Node version supports modules natively, so we don't need a CommonJS version of this stuff anymore. But even for the people who, for whatever reason, do need to consume CommonJS, well, it doesn't matter because if you're using Svelte, then you're using it via a bundler. You have to be because you can't run Svelte paths natively. So we are taking this opportunity to get rid of CommonJS and only have the module output. But at the same time, we've learned from our experience on SvelteKit that it's really beneficial to not have a build step in the library in the first place, right? We don't have a build command inside SvelteKit itself. What you import when you use SvelteKit in your app is just the code that was written. It's completely raw, completely vanilla. We use type annotations in JSDoc, and so that's how we have type safety, but we're not writing SvelteKit in TypeScript. We're not bundling SvelteKit for distribution or anything like that. It's just source code all the way down, which is really nice for things like stack traces. It's really nice for developing the framework. Like if you link a version of the framework, then you can make changes and see them reflected immediately without having to have an intermediate build step. There's all these really nice benefits that come from just shipping source code. And we want to do the same thing for Svelte itself. So in the future, the package is going to be a lot simpler and a lot leaner. We're also converting it to a mono repo, adding change sets so that we get an automated release workflow, all of these other things that are just going to make our lives a lot easier, but by extension, increase the development velocity, like improve the release cadence a little bit, and
gearing up
as
for,
I say, get the
for
house in
Svelte
order.
5 at some point.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Cool. That's a nice announcement, and I guess we're also looking forward to another announcement at some point. Secret
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool, I think.
Okay, exciting. All right. Well, thanks for anything else before we end the stream.
No, I think we're good. I kind of imagine that we would be able to riffle through that list of new features in like 20, 30 minutes. And
That's what I thought as well.
And
it was fun though.
God bless everyone who is still in the chat watching this.
Yeah, 150 people still watching.
Yeah.
So I think we were up to like 170 at some point. So it's pretty cool.
Wow.
Yep. And it's all going to be available on YouTube as well, right? So if anyone wants to watch it again, it's going to be there. All right. That's it. Thanks for joining me again, Rich. I'll see you next month for another one of these. And
yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Cheerio.
Oop, there's my hand. Let's see. End broadcast. And